Chapter 5. The Visitors. Having found no game in the forest after the prolonged hunt, Wallace and his men came upon a clearing. Prince Wallace, General Rabtak, Zorna, Joseph the apothecary, and Captain Lexi dismounted and walked their horses out of the forest and into the clearing. Down to his knee, he reached into the grass. Lexi rubbed his stomach. "It's been some time since I've been on a still hunt and captured absolutely no game at all." "Nothing," said Lexi. He unknocked the arrow he kept in the hemp string of his long bow. "It's as if someone or something has other plans for us and scared the game away. I understand your meaning. What, pray, is your appraisal, Zorna?" "It is a mystery," Zorna said flatly, paying more attention to the outlying cabin they approached more than 20 yards away. The perimeter of the cabin, covered with splotchy, burned, and dead vegetation, the cabin was untidy and disturbed. It appeared lifeless and deserted. "What is this place?" Wallace muttered, his eyes also locked onto the isolated cabin where they neared. Each man wondered where they wandered. "And sire," Joseph said, turning a glittering object over in his hand, "what is this? There seems to be something attached to it." "A mystery," said Zorna, ignoring Joseph. He took not even an instant to look at the object Joseph held to his face. "A mystery? Is that all? Is that all the Great Wizard has to say? Is a mystery?" Joseph jabbed. The men continued to approach the cabin, now within 30 feet. Lexi swept his feet through the grass as he stepped, advancing closer to the cabin. "He's without his crystal ball," Lexi snickered. "Don't bother him," said the general. "He's thinking something that might profit you as well if you would ever try." The other men shook their heads. Wallace pointed to the dead livestock scattered about the homestead. "Check your maps for landmarks," said Wallace. "Perhaps they may confirm our direction. And get a little water," said Wallace. "See, the house was vandalized and scorched. It is obvious there was a battle here." They trudged closer. They could smell scorched wood, the reminder that the thatch roof, impaled with scores of failed fire arrows, was burned away and collapsed into the standing cabin walls. The wooden fence surrounding the small homestead was shattered. Hoof marks in the mud indicate horses had trampled it. "It's as dead here," Lexi muttered, "as the forest was there." "We should announce ourselves, sire," the general said, leaning into Wallace. The mud, the splotchy grass squished beneath the horse's feet. "Hello?" Wallace shouted. "Deserted," he muttered. "During our mission you must get used to addressing me as Walter," Wallace said. "The same for the rest of you. We are incognito." Each man encircling the homestead stayed close to the walls. They peered through the windows and the large cracks in the wall, rising from the foundation. "Is anyone in there?" asked Wallace. "We're weary travelers who wish hydration and refreshment from your well," shouted General Rabtak. As they covered, they listened but heard no response. Puzzled, the general glimpsed Wallace, nodding they should proceed. They strode, combining the splotchy grass of the cluttered yard. The general discovered spots of red on the soil and grass. "Blood?" Joseph said, crouching as he strode, tugging the reins of his horse behind him. "What is that?" Lexi said. Joseph pointed, tugging his horse along by the reins. Lexi peered closer to the ground. His eyes tracked the blood trail, dotting around the ground. "My eyes are not what they used to be," Lexi said, "but I do know blood." Several stepped before the others. He stopped, at a slightly grassy depression in the ground. There the blood, black and old, was greatest. He eased onto one knee. Lexi ran his fingers through the line of the scattered white pebbles near the blood. "Someone has lain here. They dragged themselves out," he examined, pointing to a broad trail of black blood leading from the depression.
Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel Troop.
And I'm Daryl.
And I'm Sandra.
Of course, you recognize those voices by now. Those are my parents and the authors of the highly rated How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. What you just heard was an excerpt from Chapter 6. Yes, I read it. I did the voices. Thank you so much. Oscar. This scene, this chapter was very, even though the excerpt I read was short, I can assure you the rest of the chapter is amazing. It's got some surprises in there, and I want you to find them for yourselves because they'll get you. But it's big on visuals, really big on visuals, but also smell. And even though I just read the book, I just read the chapter recently now, having read it before, but like this is most recent reading. You talk about the arrows hitting the thatch of the roof and the burning wood. Now you're big on scent and things like that in your writing. Is that important to you?
Oh, yeah.
What's more important? Do you find visual? Do you find scent? Or is it sort of all of the above?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I think it depends on what kind of feeling you're trying to trigger in someone.
Right,
right. And smell is one of our basic senses. It was probably the first thing that came along before sight or vision or feeling of any of that. Right. And so when we smell things, it can inspire emotions in us.
Right.
When you're an infant, the first thing that happens in the world is that you start smelling things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the first thing that you can smell is milk. That's how you find mommy.
Well, that's the sound of me getting another idea.
Okay.
Now, we are introduced to Wallace's party in this chapter. You've got Prince Wallace, who's quite soft-spoken, but he's very... Oh, there's another idea. They just keep coming. You've got Captain Lexi, who's, he's sort of kind of a bros, and he's kind of full of himself. Mm-hmm. You've got the general, who is sort of he's got all this sort of wisdom behind him, I think, with his voice, and of course you have the wizard Zorna. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about these characters? Do you think my assessment of them is pretty accurate, or is there something maybe that we should know about them? Not, no spoilers moving forward.
Well, I think all of these guys, add to the ensemble. That we need to move the story forward. And these are some interesting guys. And of course, the general has been through a lot of wars. He's well seasoned.
Yes.
And so he's the right man for the job.
He doesn't seem too surprised by a lot of things that are happening right now. He's sort of, you can tell that he's been witness to a lot of things.
Yeah, I think an ordinary person might be shocked, but you can't be shocked and get your job done.
Right. And it seems to me that Lexi in this chapter, just off of this first, few pages, he's sort of critical of people, I think. I don't think he...
Lexi's at the stage in his life where he thinks he knows more than everybody else, and he has this intense grumbling under his voice talking about everybody, the way everybody does things.
Well, when you're young like him, you think you know everything. So he thinks he knows more than a general.
And reading into this, we're introduced to there's another idea. We're introduced to
these little ideas keep popping up. They keep bringing in.
Let me see if I can slow my ideas down a little.
Please don't do that.
If I just slow down.
Just slow your ideas down.
I've always said I have a good brain. I think it's a little too good right now. I'm going to see if I can quiet that down. It's too slow. Okay, so we have some questions also from our readers. Ernie Page wants to know, what inspired you to write science fiction?
Well, you know what? In real life, I'm a scientist, and you might even know that there are a lot of scientists, whether they're doctors or physicists, who write science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke, good example, right?
Right.
You know, and Michael Crichton was a doctor. He was very imaginative too. So we get these ideas.
And so was Einstein, and he actually said that you have to have imagination before you can have science.
Somebody asked him what was more important. He did say imagination.
Right. And you talk about you've introduced this new character in this page, Joseph, the apothecary, and he seems to work alongside the wizard Zorna. And so, as the name suggests, science fiction is science. It's fiction with a basis in science. So, how did that sort of come into play when writing characters like the apothecary Joseph?
Well, I think science and science fiction go hand in hand. He's an apothecary. I think if we were times earlier, they'd think he was a magician.
Right. And I guess nowadays we sort of call them a pharmacist, right?
Yeah, we call them a pharmacist now, but they come up with potions, and they deal in potions, and we use science as its basis, but sometimes it can seem like magic. There was a time when science, religion, and magic were all rolled into one thing. They were man's best way of trying to explain his environment and how his world worked.
Right, and it's really just sort of how stories sort of came about to begin with. We talk about, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, they've all sort of, everyone has these sort of gods and whys and what fors to explain the inexplainable at the time.
I dare say probably the caveman sat around the fire telling stories about the catch that got away or the one they caught, the huge one that they got.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Mike wants to know, what sets your your sci-fi books apart from others in the genre?
Well, I think we've tried together. I think we've come up with some really, really good ideas. There's an old saying that said 2 heads are better than one, and we both wrote this story together. So we don't get just one bent one way of looking at something. We toss this between us, and we get a better way of looking at the story. She may have some ideas, I have some ideas, and we put them together.
I think
and those ideas are different from us singularly.
I think so too. It also helps to not get pigeonholed.
Right.
Sort of,
because
you have
if one is stuck in going in.
But you also have a preferred way of looking at something or writing something, and one or the other might go, "Hey, what if you could try it this way?"
Well, we both do that often,
right?
And I think that's sometimes you can get a good example of that by bands, for instance, musical bands like the Beatles. You've got 4 individuals who are highly talented,
right?
And together they make music that's different from all 4 of them,
right? And I think so too. That they recognize where the strengths and weaknesses are in themselves and in each other. Right. And I think as a pair of writers, I think you've learned how to balance that out and say, okay, you're really good at this, I'm going to let you do that, and I'll work on that. Which leads to the next question from Herp, I think, who was a Star Wars fan. How do you develop your characters in a sci-fi setting?
Well, first you have to know your story. After you've outlined your story and you know where it's going to go, you're going to have to populate that story with people that can carry that story forward.
Right.
And you sit down, or you walk around, some people pace, and you think about the types of people that you need to do the job. You're almost like an employer, kind of, because you're hiring folks to do the job that needs to get done. So in this case, it's a little bit easier because we can invent the people.
So if you're writing a story and you're trying to figure out, who's going to get the job done, to use the analogy, how do you keep from overhiring? How do you keep from having too many extras or too many characters in a scene? How do you whittle that down?
Well, sometimes you'll have extra characters in a scene. That's true, but if you make the audience love them, then you can eliminate them.
I see. So
it brings in a lot of emotion too.
I'm pretty good at doing that.
The fodder,
Yeah.
So
it reminds me. I don't know if anybody out there ever see the movie Galaxy Quest.
Yes.
And there was the one guy. It's Sam Rockwell played in it, and he said, "Look, I don't have a name. I'm here to get killed off.
I'm just a guy. Oh.
I'm just the guy to get killed off."
Well, I guess that sort of ties into the question that we have from Amber, who is a science fiction lover, and her question is, how do you approach creating a believable and immersive sci-fi world? And I think I have an idea on how you might answer, but I want to see what you're going to say first.
Well, I think that the world has to be a hybrid. I think it's a hybrid between reality and what you can imagine. Because you want people to have something that they can grasp. If it's too alien, they might not be able to hold on to it and get their orientation. So you give them something very familiar, and then you take it to the next level.
And I think some of the greatest stories we have out there have a basis in familiarity. I think those that are the most popular, be them religious stories or mythos, they have things that we as just a human species relate to. And I think my way of thinking about approaching an immersive and believable world, as you guys are well versed in, is if you heard the chapter reading, detail. The devil is in the details.
It is.
Right.
It is.
Right.
And I think paying attention to those details is what makes things immersive. For instance, you talk about the smell of the burning wood. Last chapter we talked about, we were with Wallace and his wife, and we could smell the buttercups and the hickory on the wind. You have different foods and drinks that show up in the story, and I think bringing those in, again, a relatable thing, but I also think that it adds some tangibility and something you can touch.
Familiarity too.
Yeah.
Well, I think detail is very important. If anybody remembers the original Star Trek, for instance,
the
Enterprise, it was wonderful stories, but the Enterprise was rather barren on the inside.
Right.
You saw a few flashing lights and a lot of smooth walls.
Yeah.
And so, but if you compare that to Discovery, Star Trek Discovery, or Picard, there's more than just flashing lights. It looks like you've got a working deck.
Yes.
And it looks so realistic. That's detail.
Yeah.
That's detail that you can see. And we like to create detail that you can imagine because we actually want you to see it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think that's a key to any story is really getting
absolutely
the visuals down. I mean, when you talk about the white pebbles in his hand, and he's tracing the blood, and you see the different sort of colors. In my head, I can see this grassy sort of plain he's come to. I can see this cap, and I can smell these things. I can see the animals in the farmstead that had been practiced upon, with their weapons and such. And I think I think that's what makes it so immersive.
We wanted the detail to be so intricate that you could see the expressions on the faces changing.
Oh, absolutely.
And I wanted you to see Lexi looking at the blood and grimacing and, kind of shearing back like.
You got to see that.
You got to touch that.
Oh, yes. And because, dear listeners and readers, of course, thank you for pressing the play button. And, of course, thank you to our composer, Alexander Nakarada, who has such a visual style in his composition that you hear in our intro. If you really want to not only read the book, but see the book, and I mean see these scenes in your head, and really feel like you're living in these spaces. Well, you can pick up the book at troopbooks.com. You can check out the website at troopbooks.com. You can check out the Facebook page, the TikTok, the Instagram, all at troopbooks, TROUPE.com. If you have questions or comments, of course, as our questions keep coming in, please feel free to drop us a line on the About page at Troop Books. The book can be picked up at Troop Books. You can hit the author page at Ewing's Publishing and pick up a hardcover or a softcover. And I hope to talk to you next time on Conversations with the Authors.